Hello, class. Welcome to your first of two lectures on critical film writing. How to do it. Tips and suggestions to help you as you write your final paper for the class. And here in our first slide, we have a still from the classic Sunset Boulevard, featuring a writer played by William Holden, who ends up dead. But don't let that dissuade you. Writing is still a good thing. Okay, so we talked earlier in the class about the different kinds of writing. We talked about descriptive writing, which describes a film. We talked about evaluative writing, which you practiced with your film review, giving your opinion about the film, supporting that opinion with reasons, and now we're at interpretive writing. Now, you've been doing interpretive writing throughout the class and your different writing exercises when you make arguments for how film elements, such as cinematography, editing, and sound, are used to convey story, meaning, and emotion. So that's basically what you're going to be doing here. We're just going to learn how to extend that to make a longer, more developed argument. So let's start with a reminder of what interpretive writing is. Interpretive claim presents an argument about a film's meaning and significance. What does this film mean? That's what we're asking. These kinds of claims address a film's themes, their ideas, whether they're abstract or overt, subtle or obvious, social relevance, what it means to society, how they've affected society, how society has affected it. Although we don't touch on that as much because that's really more the realm of sociology. Historical context, attitudes that might be prevalent in a film at the time of its production, and its influence, right? How did it influence other films? How did it influence other elements of culture? But they do more than just identify those themes. They go further, making an argument about a film, what a film does with those themes, what it has to say about them. Right? Because ultimately, people write stories because they want to say something. So we need to figure out what they're trying to say and how well they're saying it. So we'll start with a couple of examples. After careful critical analysis, a viewer might conclude that one theme in Transformers relates to technology. And yes, Transformers is a worthy film for study, even though it has a reputation as being a bad film, as being a disposable film. It doesn't necessarily matter. Some of the worst and most disposable films at their time have been considered very culturally meaningful as time has worn on. So an interpretive claim might suggest Transformers questions the notion of technological progress by showing that technology actually controls people rather than the other way around. So that's your thesis. That's your argument. That's how you're interpreting at least one of the ideas in Transformers, right? Transformers questions the notion of progress by showing that technology actually controls people rather than the other way around. And then your paper would be in the service of providing evidence from the film that shows what you mean. Interpretive example 2. Another theme in the film is people working together to achieve goals. Are those themes related? Can we connect them in our claim? If so, a more complex interpretive claim might be, although an over-reliance on technology proves dangerous, Transformers assures viewers that a small group of people united by a common purpose can defeat the most powerful technological system. So again, we come up with these ideas by watching the film carefully. And we'll talk about some tips for how to do that as we go through this lecture. So while description and evaluation can be helpful when deciding whether to see a film, interpretive claims are important because they seek to understand the ways in which film art produces meaning and how meaning is interpreted by viewers, right? We just said that. Interpretive claims can be important socially and culturally. This is especially important because visual media, film, TV, video games, they're very, very powerful. They wield a disproportionate power over us in our society. We know that because we consume so much of them, right? Because we're obsessed with them for the most part. So it's important for us to be able to examine them critically, right? Because otherwise they might be working on us, might be persuading us to believe certain things without us even realizing it. And we have to recognize that the people who make media, for the most part, especially the media that we consume, that costs a lot of money and is distributed by people who have the power to distribute widely, those people are very powerful, right? And they have agendas. They might want your money. They might want your ideological allegiance, right? They might want your votes. They might want to align you against some other group in society. And we can point to all kinds of examples throughout history of media that's designed to do just that. And it works especially well on an uneducated population. So it's really important that we educate ourselves by learning how to think critically and learning how to write critically and ask critical questions. That really, really helps us as we go through life. It helps us not to be taken advantage of. It helps us understand where people are coming from, right? And at a practical level, it can help us in our jobs, in our school, in our relationships with communication. So this, I guess what I'm trying to say is this stuff goes beyond just looking at film. This can help us with everything. So let's talk about the thesis statement in a little bit more detail. I just gave you a couple about Transformers, a couple of examples. And we know, because we've taken English classes, that a thesis statement is the central claim of your paper. It's an assertion or argument that you try to prove through evidence. And you must support the thesis statement in every paragraph and section of your paper. You can't just write a thesis statement and then, write about whatever else you want related to the film as you go through the paper. So it may seem like this is very simple. Of course, we need to state what our paper is going to be about. But a lot of people, a lot of writers, especially young writers, don't do it. Or they don't do it very well. And a thesis statement is not just for your reader, it's also for you. So in developing a thesis, start by asking yourself questions such as, how is the film intriguing or perhaps disturbing? Right? And your mind should be working on these questions as you watch a film anyway. How's it's affecting you, right? Or maybe when the film's over, you can be like, wow, that affected me in a certain way, and I'm gonna start to unpack that a little bit. What makes the film noteworthy, right? Is it a film like Birdman that's shot like all in one take, right, with moving camera? Does the film use filmmaking techniques in an original or pronounced way? Does some of the filmmaking techniques jump out at you? Make you say, wow, I'm really noticing that. Why are they using that way? How is the film situated historically? If we're analyzing Gone with the Wind or The Birth of a Nation, we have to understand that it was a much more racist time, that racism was more predominantly accepted in our culture, right? So we can't analyze Gone with the Wind or Birth of a Nation as though it was just released yesterday. What is the film's effect on specific audiences? That's a little bit harder, right? Because we can't, we can't speak for everybody and what their viewing experience is, but it's still a worthwhile question to ask. If a lot of audiences are having really, really, profound effect by a film, then ask why. What is it about that film that's affected them in that way? And so these questions will help you come up with a thesis. If you're trying to figure out what to write about, ask yourself some of these questions. Take notes. Take notes while you're watching the film. So a thesis is technically your opinion, right? Because you're making an argument about what you believe. And ultimately, the way that we see films and the meaning that lies in films, it all comes down to our own point of view. There is no one objective way to understand a piece of art, although some people will try to tell you there is. But even so, it's not strictly evaluative the way that film review is. Where you can just kind of give your opinion and say, yeah, it worked for me for this reason and this reason. In interpretive writing and in critical analysis, you need to be a little bit more rigorous in backing up the reasons why you believe what you do. And that means evidence from the film, and it means evidence from other scholarship, right? From sources. And your job in an essay is to help your reader understand how the film functions. Why is it working the way it's working? How is meaning constructed through the formal film elements of narrative, of cinematography, of editing, and sound? How does the film produce social and cultural effects? If you're looking at, say, the Nazi propaganda films, right, that induced people to do awful things to each other. How were those working? Why were they so persuasive? The film's relationship to the film industry. Was a film made for money? Was it made for awards? Is it criticizing the film industry, like a satire of Hollywood might be? And how the film is historical, which we discussed in the last slide. So you need to make sure that your reader understands the purpose of your thesis, and you need to back it up with evidence. So let's just do it, because theses can be difficult. So let's just do a couple more examples. So thesis example number 1. In this paper, I argue that the help presents a traditional representation of gender roles, using narrative and visual elements to perpetuate an ideology of patriarchy, which is a male-centered society, and naturalize or normalize the idea of women as dependent mothers and homemakers. So, the help is sort of marketed and situated as a film that's anti-racist and that's about how bad racism is and so on. But you might watch it and say, wow, this is, at the same time that it's trying to be anti-racist, it's actually very sexist, right? So, and I'm not saying it is one way or another. I'm just saying that's an argument you can make. So that would be an example of a thesis. But let's say you watch The Help and you believe something differently about it. So let's look at another thesis example from the same film, because there's a million different ways, right, that you can read a film. So in this one, even though The Help represents traditional gender stereotypes, the movie is both progressive and subversive in representing women. In this paper, I will argue that The Help, through narrative and visual style, challenges patriarchy, right? In our first example, we said it reinforced patriarchy. Now we're saying it challenges patriarchy by criticizing the traditional social roles of women as mothers and homemakers. So this is a well-constructed thesis, because not only are you telling your reader what you're going to argue, that The Help criticizes traditional gender roles, but you're also telling them how you're going to prove your argument, and that's by giving them examples of narrative and visual style from the film. So this helps both the reader know exactly what they can expect, helps them follow along, but it also helps you, because you know what you're going to argue, and it's a lot easier to lay it out one paragraph at a time. So once you have your thesis laid out, you need to start thinking about how you're going to support it using evidence, both from the movie that you're analyzing and also outside sources, depending on what kind of paper you're writing. Now, I'm not asking you to use any outside sources, because I just want you to concentrate on your own analysis. and a textual analysis of the film, right? But especially as you go through your academic career, you're going to be asked to use outside sources to support what you're saying, to contextualize your argument within a larger argument that's being made. And you know, it's not just academia either. There's, you know, you might be asked in your job to write a report that uses sources that sums up the prevailing, you know, view of professionals in the field. So this is a skill that travels. It's not just for writing papers for class. So you can actually sum up the structure of your argumentative essay with this easy to remember acronym, TREE. You want to have a thesis supported by reasons, right? Why you believe what you believe, which rest upon evidence, and examples from the film and perhaps sources. Because if you really want, at the end of the day, if you really want to convince somebody of something that you believe, or that you see, or that you think is true, you need to give them evidence. You can't just ask them to take you on your word. Then we go ahead and make an outline. And I know people don't like making outlines. I was lazy about it for many years, but I always make an outline now for whatever I'm writing, because it just makes life so much easier when you know where you're going. So when we're analyzing the film, we experience it scene by scene, but if we want to know how the scenes work together, we need an idea of the film's overall structure or shape. And that means writing stuff down, right? Making an outline that reflects structural elements. And you've learned how to break down movies into the structural elements, whether they're storytelling elements like act structure, right? Or cinematographic elements, the way scenes are shot, the way they're edited, that sort of thing. And as you watch a film, you should also jot down brief, accurate descriptions of the various film techniques used, and you should have a lot of that language now. You have a lot of the terms so far in this class. Once you have determined the overall organizational structure of the film, how it's put together, then you can identify salient techniques, trace out patterns of techniques across the whole film. Say, for example, you notice a very particular editing strategy, right? Then you can, as you watch the film, you can jot down the 5 different times that editing strategy is used. And then when you go to write your paper, you've got your examples and your evidence right there, right? You can slot them in. This paper argues this, and here's the stuff from the movie that shows why it's true, right? Finally, once you have a solid idea of how the film is structured and have carefully noted any outstanding use of film techniques, you can begin to make a case for the purpose of the structure. In other words, what meaning is being produced as a result. And, you know, that's if you're looking for something to write about. Sometimes you'll already have something in your mind very strong that you want to write about, and so you're just looking for the evidence to support it. But sometimes you need to sift through everything to come up with an idea of what's really going on, right? And this exercise can also help if you want to be a filmmaker yourself. If you're making a film, it's just as important to figure out the structure, the techniques you want to use that are going to convey meaning before you go in and start to put everything together.